So Stephanie, in 3 minutes, why we mill with such care. If you imagine these are pigment particles, what we try and do in the milling process is move them apart so that each one is covered in oil. And we call that primary particles. That for us is the promised land, because if we don't reach primary particles and we still have what we call aggregates or agglomerates, where lots of pigment particles are stuck together, it's bad news for you as a lithographer. First of all, the more pigment particles you have, the greater the chance that the middle of that clump of particles is going to be dry. And of course, lithography works on the principle of oil and water not mixing. So your water will work its way to that middle bit of particle there, saturate it with water. The ink will then have a confused identity. It'll be happy either in the image area or the non-image area. So we try and separate the pigment particles. Another reason why it's important we do that, you only need a few particles still together and they will exert a force on other pigment particles and they will start moving in. You know, if somebody falls over in the street, the phenomena is, well, what happens if someone falls over in the street?
It's a crowd gathers.
A crowd gathers, a crowd attracts a crowd, and that's called flocculation. And so other particles will come in over a period. It may feel as if the ink is drying. That's not what's happening. It's not even bodying up. It's becoming gritty because the pigment particles are moving back together. So we try and move them apart. We don't overgrind them, and that's really important with certain colours. If you think of this here giving us boiled sweets, it gives us a general tone. If this was a bag of pigment, it would be possible to overgrind it. I took one of these mints yesterday and it looked very odd to colleagues because I hit it with a hammer repeatedly and I ended up with this, a very different colour. Now, things such as the blues especially, there are certain blues whose colour, ultramarine would be an example, depending on the smallness of the pigment particle, its very colour will be different. Some pigments are coated to allow one to flow over the other. If we over mill them, we spoil that coating, and some we simply damage and we change the chromophore, which is that little detail of the colour, so one can make a yellow appear greener if you over grind it. So how do we know we've reached optimum grind? You're going to show us, Paul, using some cheap acrylic because it's easy to wash up afterwards.
Yeah, sure. So as we know, we're going to have different sized particles in our ink. And again, just to reiterate Michael's point, we don't really want to destroy any one of those particles into separate bits. We just want to separate the particles from each other. So how can we know what the size of each particle is? Quite a difficult thing to do, but Mr. Hegman came up with such a gauge, and it's basically like a swimming pool. So we have a deep end here, and we have a shallow end here. So if we take some of our acrylic paint,
I should say it's not our acrylic, we don't make acrylic,
sorry.
but it's nice and cheap and easy to show.
Then we can place some of that at the deep end of the pool, and if we use a solid bar to drag that ink along, the pool gets shallower and shallower and shallower, and eventually you hit a point at which the pigments start to get dragged along. So you can imagine, if we use the pool analogy, any head sticking above the pool is going to get dragged along, and we'll see these stripes starting to occur, and that then can be measured on the gauge on the side, which is your reading for the particle size. And in this way, we can do this for each batch, and we can see exactly what the particle size is of the batch and make sure it complies with the control and the specification.
That was in 3 or 4 minutes, perhaps?
Yeah.
Thanks very much indeed. Thanks.